Welcome to The Explainer. Right now, we're unpacking a massive, structural shift happening across the global economy. You see, for decades, the world basically ran on a system backed by paper and trust, specifically, trust in the US dollar and traditional financial networks. But today, we are witnessing a profound, real-time transition away from that system. We're moving into an era defined by hard assets, physical supply chains, and a brand new economy of security. And this isn't just some high-level finance theory. It's about the cost of the smartphone in your pocket and the actual energy that powers your home. It's entirely about who controls the tangible physical resources that keep our world running.
Okay, let's dive right into this because this number, it's absolutely staggering. $3.909 trillion. That is the current value of official global gold holdings. And what makes this number so historically significant is that it is just remarkably caught up to the $3.920 trillion in foreign holdings of U.S. Treasuries. Just think about that. For the first time in modern monetary history, gold and U.S. Treasuries are effectively sitting at parity in central bank portfolios. To really understand why the world's central banks are trading paper debt for physical metal, we have to look at what's fracturing the system.
Section 1. The Trust Deficit, the fracture of the global monetary order.
To really grasp this fracturing trust, we've got to look at how financial sanctions are forcing countries to completely reassess their vulnerabilities, and it starts with the petrodollar system. Traditionally, because global energy trade was settled in US dollars, there was this constant, built-in international demand for US sovereign debt. Surplus cash from energy exports would just get recycled right back into US treasuries. But as financial sanctions are increasingly used as a foreign policy tool, this traditional system is steadily eroding. As sanctioned countries are forced entirely outside of this network, non-aligned states are aggressively reassessing their own dollar exposure. They are actively out there seeking alternative settlement systems just to avoid being caught in the crossfire.
Section 2. Gold overtakes the dollar, the return to the ultimate safe haven.
So how exactly are global central banks reacting to this massive trust deficit? Well, they're hoarding physical gold at a pace we've never really seen before. This is a massive macro-level shift away from digital conditional assets, right back to the ultimate unconditional safe haven. And when you dig into the data, this accumulation isn't evenly distributed at all. It is heavily concentrated in emerging economies. Russia and China are completely leading the pack, each adding around 1,800 tons, followed really closely by Turkey and India. These nations are deliberately, methodically building up reserves completely outside the US Treasury market. They are hunting for financial independence, and gold is absolutely their asset of choice.
The core reason for this massive hoarding, it's pretty simple actually. Gold has completely re-emerged as the preferred neutral reserve asset. Why? Because it lives entirely outside the digital financial system. You don't need to worry about maritime choke points like the Strait of Hormuz or the Red Sea to settle a trade. It literally cannot be frozen by a foreign government, and it can't be boarded by a rival navy. In a highly fragmented world, physical possession is the ultimate form of security. And this brilliantly illustrates a really fascinating dynamic. Academic research, using a model called quantile-on-quantile regression, actually reveals that gold has this U-shaped relationship with equity markets. It doesn't just automatically go up when stocks go down. Instead, it acts as a true safe haven only at the absolute extremes. It delivers its absolute strongest gains during sharp market crashes or, surprisingly enough, during exceptional bull runs. Basically, gold is kind of like that friend who only shows up when there's a massive party or a complete disaster. In ordinary, muted market conditions, its role is far less pronounced. It's an asset that is activated by crisis or exceptional growth.
Section 3. The Critical Mineral Bottleneck, zooming into the physical economy.
Now, what's really interesting is that the exact same geopolitical trust deficit pushing central banks toward gold is also kicking off a wild territorial scramble for 47 critical minerals. These are the literal building blocks of the future: electric vehicles, advanced defense systems, renewable energy. But the true bottleneck here isn't just about digging rocks out of the ground, it's about processing them. China holds a massive, dominant monopoly here. We're talking controlling 90% of graphite purification, 85% of rare earth refining, and huge shares in cobalt and lithium. That is a severe single-source dependency that leaves global supply chains incredibly vulnerable. Honestly, even minerals extracted right in the US often have to be shipped all the way to China for processing before they can even be used in American manufacturing.
So to try and escape this massive bottleneck, the United States is fighting back with a $12 billion defense plan known as Project Vault. Think of this as a hybrid financial architecture designed specifically to build a strategic critical minerals reserve. It uses $10 billion in Export-Import Bank loan guarantees combined with $2 billion in private capital. The whole goal here is to provide guaranteed buyers or offtake agreements for new mining projects in allied nations, essentially securing the supply chain without having to rely on foreign processing monopolies. So the crucial point is that this $12 billion budget runs face first into a pretty harsh mathematical reality. The stated U.S. policy goal is to build a 60-day strategic supply buffer across all critical minerals. But when you look at the analysis, if you distribute that money evenly, $12 billion only buys about 45 days of maximum coverage. This forces policymakers into a really tough choice. Do you create a comprehensive but very shallow reserve across all 44 minerals, or do you build deep, robust reserves for just a handful of highly critical metals used in things like defense and semiconductors? Either choice leaves the technology we rely on every single day super vulnerable to major supply shocks.
Section 4, Gulf states enter the race, the new gatekeepers.
While the US and China are going toe-to-toe, a completely different power bloc is leveraging this global fragmentation. Traditional petrostates in the Middle East are aggressively positioning themselves right at the center of the green energy transition through a strategy called resource nationalism. You see, for the Gulf states, it's just not enough to simply export raw materials anymore. They want the whole shebang, direct, strategic, and economic control over the entire downstream process. To secure their long-term economic survival in a post-oil world, these nations are dropping massive amounts of capital to build domestic electric vehicle and battery manufacturing hubs right in their own backyards.
Let's look at how this builds out, because the global chessboard is changing incredibly fast. The Gulf states aren't just building at home. They are out there buying up assets everywhere. Saudi Arabia recently acquired a $2.5 billion stake in Vale. The UAE launched a $1.2 billion joint venture targeting critical mineral assets globally, jumping right into the competition for copper and tin in Africa. And recently, the US and Saudi Arabia even signed a high-level critical mineral pact. They are rapidly transforming into absolutely indispensable players on the global stage.
And their strategy is honestly incredibly clever. It's called pragmatic hedging. The Gulf states aren't actually trying to displace China entirely. In fact, they are happily partnering with Chinese firms to gain all that processing expertise. But simultaneously, they're turning around and offering themselves to Western consumers as a reliable alternative supply chain. They are purposefully positioning themselves as a neutral, totally indispensable node in an increasingly divided world.
Section 5. The New Wealth Playbook. Adapting to a Brittle World.
Now, in this much more brittle, unpredictable environment, the stewards of the largest pools of capital on Earth, sovereign wealth funds, they're having to literally tear up and rewrite their entire investment playbooks. The old rules of globalization, they simply do not apply anymore. To survive this fragmentation, they're ditching those traditional 60-40 stock and bond splits that relied on a low-inflation world. Instead, they are actively hunting for inflation-proof hard assets, they're forcing portfolio companies to prove their climate resilience, and crucially, they're treating geopolitical risk as a baseline requirement for every single investment. You literally can no longer analyze an investment without deeply analyzing the geopolitical risks attached to it.
And by the way, this massive shift to hard assets isn't limited to just gold and rare earths. Take silver, for example. We're seeing a fundamental strategic shift where silver is transforming from a basic, cyclical industrial metal into a critical national security asset. Countries like China are importing absolute record amounts of silver, pulling that demand way forward specifically to secure independent, unblockadable solar energy systems. Energy security is absolutely becoming a national defense priority, and physical metals are the foundation of that defense.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. We are living through a historic pivot from an economy built on paper and global trust to one built entirely on hard, tangible assets and self-reliance. We've got central banks hoarding gold, superpowers fighting tooth and nail over critical mineral supply chains, and the Gulf states masterfully positioning themselves as the new neutral gatekeepers. So as the world trades paper for physical assets, who will ultimately control the vault? It's a high-stakes geopolitical chess match that's going to define the next century, and we'll be watching every single move. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.